Today I'm going to be talking about my mental health journey and how I overcame depression and improved my mindset whilst having undiagnosed ADHD and potentially undiagnosed autism. If you're interested in hearing about this, keep watching. Hi, I'm Cath, I'm 40 and this year I was diagnosed with combined type ADHD. I'm going to be talking about my own journey with my mental health. And I do just want to give a trigger warning to say I will be talking about suicide. So if that is going to be a problem for you, it might be better to switch off now. Okay, first of all, I consider myself to be an empath. And for those of you who aren't sure what an empath is someone who not only is able to feel empathy. A lot of people in the world can feel sympathy. Sympathy is like feeling sorry for people and being like, oh, that's really sad. Empathy is being able to put yourself in their shoes and imagine what they're going through. And being an empath is where you feel what they're feeling as though it's your own. And whether that be happiness or sadness, you can feel it on behalf of other people, almost. I'm not saying exactly to the same extent they do, but possibly to that extent. So it might seem irrelevant, but the reason it's relevant is because as an empath, we can often take on other people's problems and it feels like you've got the weight of the world on your shoulders. So that was kind of a little backstory. And I've been an empath since I was born, but definitely since I was young. My childhood was difficult. And I was a very sensitive, little girl. I cared about a lot of things. This is where the empath comes in. Like, I was very, very passionate about injustices, like about making things right, making the world a better place. I was very passionate about that when I was very young. So even at like the age of 3, the age of 4. And other children my age weren't like that, and as a result of that, I kind of took on a lot more, even from a young age. I grew up in a chaotic home. There was a lot of arguing. Eventually it became a broken home. You know, my mum and dad got divorced. There was a lot going on. There was a lot of chaos, there was a lot of sadness, and there was a lot of other things going on along the lines of emotional abuse. And growing up, it was really difficult. I had to grow up from a very young age, and I had to be independent from a young age. Aside from the typical kind of traumas, I hate saying it like that because parents getting divorced is a trauma for a child. It is a trauma, and this is not to make anyone feel guilty, or because I understand that in life sometimes it needs to be done and people need to get divorced. I understand that, but it doesn't take away from the fact that it is a trauma on the child. So aside from those traumas, I experienced other traumas that were far more had an effect. When I was around the age of 10 or 11, somebody who I love very much, who had at that time recently been diagnosed with autism, attempted to take her own life. And at the time, she was a child as well, and I was the one who found her. And I'll never forget that day. I'll never forget that. That's ingrained in my memory, and obviously I'm not going to go into too many details. But on that day, when I found her, I thought she was dead. Luckily, she was just unconscious, and which sounds sounds awful to say luckily, but that was obviously the better alternative. But that day is stuck in my brain, and I am working on that. I'm working on it, but that's something I'll never forget. And she was struggling as well. She is okay now. I just need to say that she is okay. But obviously that was a very difficult thing to experience. Growing up, home life was chaotic, continued to be chaotic. It was a very weird situation. There was, again, I'm not going into too many details because I have now moved on from a lot of things, but it was difficult, basically. It was difficult. I felt like I had the weight of the world on my shoulders. It just seemed to be kind of one chaos, one drama after another, one sadness after another. There was just so much that kept happening, and this carried on into my adulthood. Growing up, I was so shy. I had pretty much non-existent self-esteem, and I always felt like I wasn't good enough. Throughout my life, because I was sensitive and caring, I was always told I was too sensitive and I cared too much, and I was too this and too that, and that has an effect, and that makes you feel unworthy, and that's how I felt. I felt like I was worthless, and I was so shy, I was awkward, I found it difficult to talk to people. I did have friends, but I was always the shyest friend, and I was always the one who, I'd be a target for getting picked on, and because people knew that I wasn't going to stand up for myself. People knew that, and I could never understand that, because I would never want to make anyone feel like that. So I just couldn't understand why they enjoyed making me feel like that. At the age, when I was a teenager, I can't remember the age, I actually taught myself how to give eye contact. I was just so stressed out about being shy that I thought I need to do something about it. And obviously, I looked at what do other people do, and eye contact, I taught myself how to do it. Even now as an adult, I am very, very conscious of eye contact, and I am consciously thinking, when I'm talking to someone, I'm thinking about eye contact. Am I giving enough eye contact? Am I giving too much? Am I staring at them? Am I not looking at them at all? And the fact that when you're so conscious of it, I didn't realise that the average neurotypical person is not conscious of eye contact in that way. So as a result, I carried on trying to push myself, trying to become more confident. I carried on doing things like that. I got mistreated by a lot of people. People walked all over me, and I still didn't stand up for myself. All of this has an impact. That, on top of the childhood trauma, on top of everything that was going on in my mind, on top of undiagnosed ADHD, where I was already struggling, there's certain things I was struggling with, and I was already thinking, why can't you do this? So I was making myself feel unworthy as well. So it was just a combination of all of that. And when I got to the age of 18, I became addicted to alcohol. Something happened that I found that was really difficult for me to deal with, emotionally, and I became addicted to alcohol. I have spoken about that in my previous video, so if you're interested in finding out about that, if you watch that video, I go into a lot more detail. But when I became addicted to alcohol, that was the loneliest time of my life, and my family life was strained. Things weren't going right in my life. I felt lonely, I felt misunderstood. I had all this unhealed trauma that I kind of just thought was normal. At the time I didn't realise it was trauma. It's only like looking back as an adult where I think, wow, you know, at the time I didn't realise. I just knew that I felt sad. I knew that I was finding it hard to cope. So I turned to alcohol. I am no longer addicted to alcohol. So you'll find out more about that in the video. But basically, at the age of 19, I met my husband. I had my first daughter at the age of 21. All this time, my mental health was not in a good place, but I was kind of pushing it all down, like many people do. I was pushing it down. I had my second daughter when I was 29, and at the age of 30, I was struggling a lot, like to the point where I was just so used to life being difficult that I thought this is just what life is like, and that made me feel hopeless. That made me feel like I can't cope with this anymore, and my thoughts were getting darker. And there was one particular day where I didn't want to be here anymore, and it scared me a lot, and I felt like I was kind of, the only way to describe it is I felt like I was stuck between life and death. I felt like I'd fallen down this ditch and I was stuck at the bottom. That's the only way I can properly describe it. And on that day, I remember I was sat down in the living room and I looked at my daughters. My two daughters were playing, and I looked at them and I thought that was the kick up the bum that I needed. That made me think, right, I need to do something now. So I phoned the doctor and I asked for an appointment, and the secretary said, oh, we've got an appointment in, like, I think she said about 2 weeks, something like that. And I was like, oh right, have you got anything sooner please? And she said, do you mind me asking what it's for? So I said, I told her how I was feeling, and she was like, right, I'm getting you an appointment today. And she got me an appointment for like an hour later, like an urgent appointment, and I was so grateful for that. Like, she said, you need an urgent appointment. So I went to the doctor's that day, and he did this big long questionnaire with me, and I answered the question. He asked me loads of questions. I told him, I didn't even tell him the true extent of how I was feeling. I just said that I'd been struggling and I was finding it difficult to cope. And he told me that I had severe depression. And I was kind of in shock, and I thought, oh, and it sounds, now when I think about it, it's unbelievable that I didn't know, because of the way that I was feeling. How can you feel like that without having depression? But I didn't know. And so he told me I had severe depression. He prescribed me some antidepressants and he put me on the waiting list for counselling. He was lovely. He was really, really kind and supportive. And I'm so grateful for that, because if I'd have maybe seen a doctor that was less empathic, things like that, times like that especially, it's important. The doctor's bedside manner is important. So I walked out of there, and this is going to sound really weird, but even though that was the darkest day of my life, that was one of the best days of my life, because for the first time in a long time I had hope, and I felt like I had a second chance at life. because I thought that life was just like that and it was going to continue to be like that. Whereas knowing I had depression meant I knew I could do something about it. I don't want to say fix it, but I could heal it. I could work through it. So I started taking the antidepressants and they worked so quickly. And I remember thinking, wow, these are amazing. This is what it feels like to feel normal. That's what I felt. It was like, and maybe it was a placebo effect, and that doesn't matter because it worked anyway. But basically, I felt it was like I wasn't stressing about everything. I didn't feel like I had the weight of the world on my shoulders when they were working. But I knew I wasn't going to just take the antidepressants and leave it at that. I was obviously waiting for counselling, and I knew the waiting list was going to be, this was 10 years ago now, so the waiting list will have been shorter, but I think it was still at least 2 months. So in the meantime, I thought, I'm going to change everything about my life. So I'm going to talk about that in a second. But first of all, I carried on with the antidepressants. I started counselling. I have had a lot of counselling over the years and it definitely works, which is why I'm training to be a counsellor myself. It obviously takes some time because some of those deep-rooted traumas they're so deep-rooted that you can't just deal with them in a day. It takes time to heal. And healing isn't just like a straight line, it's full of ups and downs, and it's like, so that's part of the process. Eventually, I just need to add this, eventually the antidepressants I was on stopped working. And luckily at that point, I was kind of in a slightly better place. Like I needed them at that time. They picked me up to a place where I was able to help myself. So I did need them. When they stopped working, I changed onto some other antidepressants, which I hated. I'm a passionate person and I feel my emotions very intensely, like many other neurodivergent people do. And these second lot of antidepressants that I was put on, they made me feel like a zombie. My emotions were just like this. And that was a horrible feeling because not only I couldn't feel sad, which was obviously good in that situation, but I couldn't feel happy either. I couldn't feel empathy. Like if one of my daughters fell over and hurt themselves, the words would be there, I'd be like, oh, are you okay? But the emotion behind it wasn't there. And I hated that because I am a caring person and that just made me feel like a zombie. So I ended up having some other side effects as well from them. So I just tapered off them myself. I'm not advising people to do that, by the way. This is not medical advice. This is just what I did. I felt like I needed to do that at that time. And at this point, when I tapered off those antidepressants, I was in a much better place mentally. So yeah, came off the antidepressants. The counselling is what did the deep work. And I need to say this to you, antidepressants will not fix the problem. They will, and I'm certainly not saying not to take them. If you need them, then take them. But the underlying issues are still going to be there, so you have to work on that as well. The trauma, happy people do not become depressed. I believe, again, like I've said in my previous video, that I don't believe addiction is a disease. I believe we can have genes that make us more prone to addiction. Same with, we can have genes that make us more prone to depression, but it takes it takes outside triggers to activate that depression is what I believe. So for example, trauma, feeling lonely, different, obviously, life stress that's happening in life, it takes those outside factors to kind of activate it. I'm not a medical professional, that's just my opinion. So if you are struggling with depression at the moment, please, and you are not getting counselling, please consider getting counselling, because that is going to be the real thing that heals from the inside. So yeah, that's my main journey with mental health. Now I'm going to talk about how I came out of depression, how I improved my mindset even while having undiagnosed ADHD and potentially undiagnosed autism. So on that day I went to the doctors, that was the day I started. That was the day that I started changing my life. I got home and I started reading everything. You know, us ADHDers, we are amazing researchers, and I started researching everything. I looked at all the areas of my life. How could I make them better? What could I do to change things? So one of the things I did was I thought about my diet and the way that I ate, and it was okay. It wasn't great. So just a little backstory. I was vegetarian from the age of 4. So at this point I was vegetarian. I'm now vegan. I've been vegan for 6 years for the animals. But when I was vegetarian, especially through my teenage years, I was a junk food vegetarian. I was very unhealthy. I was kind of, when it came to food and eating, I was kind of all or nothing. I had a very unhealthy relationship with food. So I'd either be on a diet and being really strict, and because I hated myself and because I was trying to change the way that I looked, so I'd be on these diets, and then I'd eat one biscuit and then think, oh, I've ruined it, and then I'd go and get a chippy, and I'd go and order a pizza, you know, things like that. So I was kind of very much like a all or nothing kind of eater. And when I was I did a lot of binge eating. So by this point, at the age of 30, I wasn't so much like that, but my diet still wasn't the healthiest. It was healthy-ish. I still ate fruit and veg and stuff, but it wasn't the healthiest. So the first thing I did was starting to clean up my diet. I stopped having artificial sweeteners because I'd read about how toxic they are for your body. At this time, I still drank alcohol socially. It wasn't at that point that I quit drinking, but I didn't ever drink in the house anyway. I was kind of like just a social drinker, but cut out artificial sweeteners and chemicals in food. When I would buy things, I'd be more conscious of the ingredients. I tried to aim for more. I didn't eat completely whole foods, but I tried to aim for more like clean whole foods, like focus around fresh fruit and vegetables and things like that. I stopped having sugar in my coffee. And if I sweetened things, I did it with natural things like maple syrup, or at the time honey. So changing my diet was one thing, because you've got to understand this. You literally are what you eat. And if you're eating rubbish food, you're going to feel rubbish. If you're eating like lively, full of life kind of food, you're going to feel like that. So diet plays a big role in that. The second thing I did was I stopped watching the news and I stopped listening to the news. And I know there's plenty of people in the world that will be like, oh, well, you should be aware of what's going on. And of course, but even by stopping watching the news and stopping listening to it, you can still choose to, if you feel like you're in a certain frame of mind, you can still choose to read certain articles. It's not about being oblivious to what's going on in the world. The news isn't always balanced anyway. And for a person who's struggling with their mental health, the news is literally, it's bad news. It's not going to make anything better in your life. It's just going to make you feel more hopeless. To be honest, I don't know why anyone watches the news, but I get it. People need to know what's going on in the world. But that would be that was my second thing that I did. I stopped watching the news because even now, I know what time, when I'm listening to the radio in the car, I know what time the news comes on, and it's on the same every single channel that's on at the same time. So I just turn the radio off for those 5 minutes that the news is on. I don't want to hear it. But I will choose when I'm in a certain frame of mind, when I feel okay, I will choose to read certain things if I choose to. And that's okay. I still know what's going on in the world, but without having to experience, like as an empath, watching the news is just, it's so detrimental to your well-being. Next, I read loads of books. I read loads of like personal development books, and yeah, reading is not easy for everyone, especially if you with ADHD and you can't concentrate for long periods of time. You could listen, I could have listened to books, but I do enjoy reading when I feel like I've got the time to do it. But I am one of those people who reads the same page over and over because it didn't sink in the first time. But I started reading personal development books, and I also read The Secret by Rhonda Byrne, and that book absolutely changed my life. It was mainly the gratitude part of that book that changed my life. So I have always been a grateful person. I have always been grateful for things and said please and thank you. But until I read that book, I didn't really think about what true gratitude is, and it made me grateful to be awake in the morning. It made me grateful to have clean running water, because not everyone has that. It made me grateful to have a roof over my head, and I started practicing gratitude when I was 30, like proper true gratitude when I was 30 from reading that book. And I've done it every day of my life for the last 10 years, and I will continue to do that. Basically, I don't even have to say it out loud. I just think in my head the things that I'm grateful for each day. And gratitude, what that has done for me has been more powerful than probably any of the other things that I did, because gratitude made me see the good in everything, or the good in most things. It's made me be able to find something good even in difficult situations. And let's not be unrealistic. There's certain situations that happen in life that are horrible, and you might not be able to, in that moment, you might not be able to find anything good, and you wouldn't be expected to look for anything good in that moment. But gratitude in general, it makes you appreciate the little things in life, and that's what I love about that. It's really changed me as a person. The next thing I did was I started setting boundaries with people, and due to the type of person that I was a people pleaser. I had been for my whole life. I always put my own needs last, and I was the type of person that would, if someone asked me to do something, I felt like I couldn't say no, even if it was going to make me late for something, or even if it was going to cause a problem for me, I would still say yes because I felt like I had to. I started setting boundaries with people, and I had people in my life that, like family members, for example, who I had to set some clear boundaries with them, and it was not easy whatsoever. It was difficult, but I just did it in small steps. A lot of the time when you set boundaries with people, it doesn't go down well, which was the case for me. People are used to a version of you, and if that version of you is a people pleaser, they expect you to continue being a people pleaser because it benefits them. But when you start to change that, often people don't like it because it makes their life more difficult. I set boundaries with people in my life, and sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. And when it continued to not work, I have had to let people go out of my life. I've had to lose contact with people. And that in itself is a trauma, to have to do that. But at the same time, if your mental health is being affected, then if they're not looking out for your mental health by overstepping your boundaries, you have got to look out for your mental health. And I just want to make it clear, I'm not just saying to people, go and cut contact with people. I'm just talking about my story and what I had to do. And even though I'm talking about it now quite calmly, mental health wise, I can't even tell you how much it set me back to have to cut contact with certain people in my life. I grieved so deeply, and even though now I seem quite calm about it, I really wasn't, and it really, really affected me a lot. But the alternative was worse, so I had to do it. Another thing I started doing was to exercise and eat out of love for myself, not out of hate for myself. So, for example, growing up, I would go on diets or obsessively exercise because I wanted to lose weight, because I felt like I wasn't good enough. After being diagnosed with depression and changing my life, I appreciated myself so much, and I appreciated that actually, look at all the things you've already been through in life, all the difficult things you've experienced. And I started treating myself with more love. And don't get me wrong, that was difficult, because I was used to hating myself. I was used to talking negatively about myself, putting myself down, thinking negatively about myself. So I started doing things out of love. I would go for walks just for the fact of being in the fresh air, being out in nature, and getting exercise at the same time, because my body deserves that. Or whatever kind of exercise I did, I would do it because I deserved that. My body deserves to be able to be active, and that's why I did it. When I ate out of love. I thought I wanted to give myself the good ingredients that were not going to be toxic for my body. So that's the other thing I did. Okay, the next one is really important. And throughout my life, I'd suppressed my feelings, like many people do in this world. People are kind of used to that, right? We've got to pretend everything's okay, don't cry about things, just get on with it kind of thing. So everyone pushes it down. Not everyone, sorry. A lot of people push their feelings down. When you suppress feelings, especially if you're suppressing what are seen as negative feelings, when they're not actually negative, they're just like messengers from your body and your mind trying to say, listen, something's not right, we need to change something. But when we suppress anger and sadness and frustration and things like that, it stays in us. And it's going to come out one day, like it did for me. It came out as depression, it came out as addiction, and it's going to come out one day. So after I was diagnosed with depression, I knew I couldn't do that anymore. I knew I couldn't do that. I allowed myself to feel my feelings, whether I saw them as positive or negative. I felt every little thing. I allowed it. So for example, it's okay to cry. It's healthy to cry, and you'll notice that sometimes once you've had a good cry, you feel loads better, you've released things. And by suppressing that, you're just basically saying, no, keep it in. It's going to come out. So I allowed myself to feel everything. Here's another thing that I did with regards to emotions. So if I was, for example, sad, I would allow myself to be sad about whatever it was. When I got to the point of coming down from that sadness, I would think about, are there any changes I could make that might improve this situation? Is there anything I can do? If there was, I would do those things. If there wasn't, maybe I would continue to feel sad for a bit longer until it just naturally completely dispersed on its own. There are obviously things in life that are going to have such a deep impact, like grief. You can't just push through grief. And I'm certainly not suggesting that. I'm talking about allowing your feelings. If it's a situation that isn't, for example, grief, but something that you're sad about, once you've allowed yourself to be sad, is there anything you can do about it in a positive way? If there isn't, then you're just going to have to allow how you're feeling. If there is, what can you do? If you can do those things, get them done. Has the situation improved? So this is what I do now in life. I allow everything. I encourage my daughters to allow all of their feelings, and I encourage everyone, absolutely everyone, because you can't suppress these emotions. It's going to come out. It comes out. Trauma stays in the body. If it's not going to come out in a mental health way, it'll come out in a physical health way. The next thing I did was I started making time for the things I love. Even if that was just a small amount of time every day or a few times a week, I would make time for those things, because it's important to be able to enjoy life. Life is not meant to be, it's not meant to be difficult. Contrary to popular belief, we're not here just to go to work and get a mortgage, and that's not what life's about. We are meant to enjoy life, and especially you have to give yourself those times to enjoy things that you want to do. So I made time to do, like, genealogy is something I'm so passionate about. I love working on my family tree. I made time for that. I made time for, like, just going, like, walking out in nature, things like that, spending time around animals, doing fun things. Like, I love doing escape rooms, and these are the things, like, that is amazing for my ADHD brain, an escape room. I started making time to do things that I enjoy. The next thing I did eventually was to stop drinking alcohol. And again, you can find out more about that in my previous video. But my cycle with alcohol would be, even off small amounts of alcohol, I'd get a horrendous hangover. But my mental health would be impacted for about at least 4 days after drinking. It would be, I was working so hard to improve my mental health and my well-being. And then I would have a drink, like I'd go out to a wedding or something, have a drink, and then for days after that, my mental health would be on the floor. And eventually it clicked, and I thought, I'm working so hard trying to improve my mental health, and I'm just undoing it all with the alcohol. So I stopped drinking, and again, you know, if you're okay with alcohol and you can drink sensibly and feel okay off it, then that's your choice. But to me, alcohol and mental health issues do not mix. They don't. Especially for ADHDers and autistic people who are more prone to addiction in the first place. Again, this is your life and your decision. These are just things that I did. I am gonna do more videos in the future about things like how to set boundaries with people, but I hope this video has been helpful for you. These are some of the things I did, and I can honestly say to you that my mental health is the best it's ever been. Now, don't get me wrong, I obviously was recently diagnosed with ADHD, and the reason I worked out that I had ADHD was because, in spite of all the things I'd changed, in spite of the fact that I'd improved my life so much and I was feeling a lot happier, I still had things that I struggled with in life, which were my ADHD traits, which were my disorganisation, time blindness, the deep, like, intense emotions, rejection sensitivity, things like that. The fact that they didn't change when I changed my lifestyle habits is what made me realise that I had ADHD. I have found ways around some of those things now. Again, I will talk about that in a future video, but I just want to say that if you're struggling with depression or with any mental health issues at the moment, please don't give up. Please don't don't think that it has to be forever, because it doesn't. Like, I no longer consider myself to have depression, and I've not been on antidepressants now for a long time, probably at least 7 years, maybe even 8 years, I don't know. There are ways around it, and if you're experiencing depression, I know how dark that feels, I know that, but there are things you can do to help yourself. If you believe you've got unhealed trauma, could you speak to someone about that? If there are things in your life that you know aren't working for you, whether that be like lifestyle habits or anything, is there something you can change? And if you're struggling with anything, obviously speak to your GP or speak to someone you trust. I just want to remind you, this is not medical advice. I am not a medical professional, but I hope it's helpful. I hope it's been helpful for you. And if you found this video valuable, please like and subscribe. Thank you.